Side 7. A Summer to Remember by Mary Balogh. Continuing on page 236. Baron Galton had come by gig with Sir Melvyn Plissett to the stretch of riverbank where all the men and boys had gathered to fish, but he chose to walk with Kit back to the house, relinquishing his place in the vehicle to the Earl. "A dashed good spot for fishing," he said. "We have always had pleasure from it," Kit agreed. "There are few more relaxing ways to spend a morning." The others strode on ahead, talking all at once, it appeared, and bearing the morning's catch with them. Kit reduced his stride to accommodate the slower pace of the elderly gentleman. "I am planning, sir," he said, when there was no longer any possibility of their being overheard, "to institute an inquiry. I was a reconnaissance officer for a number of years, as you know, and have several useful contacts at both the Foreign Office and the War Office. I know many officers who are still active in the field, too. I believe you should be aware of what I plan to do. I hope to discover exactly where, when, and how Mrs. Wyatt, Lauren's mother, your daughter, died." "Why?" Baron Galton looked at him sharply. "What the devil do you want to know that for?" It was somewhat taken aback by his almost hostile tone. "You have never been curious yourself, sir?" "Never," the old man assured him. "They met with some misadventure and died, and word did not get back to us. That is all. People, sons, daughters, parents, die every day, Ravensburg. We can do nothing to bring them back once they are gone. It is pointless to spend time and money and effort simply to discover what we already know. It is best to leave them in peace and get on with our own lives." A sensible attitude, perhaps, but it did not seem quite natural for a father to be so unconcerned about his daughter's fate. "You made no inquiries at the time, sir?" he asked. "At what time?" the Baron asked. "They never did write often. How were we to know? They were even missing until years had gone by. By then, any inquiry would have been fruitless." "Did the Earl of Kilbourne make no attempt to locate his brother, or discover what had happened to him?" "Look here, Ravensburg." Baron Galton had stopped walking and was regarding Kit sternly from beneath bushy eyebrows. "I have no doubt you are the clever young man, and are eager to impress your betrothed by discovering what no one else has discovered in 10 or 15 years. But take my advice and leave it. Let sleeping dogs lie." Kit looked steadily back at him. "Good God, sir," he said with sudden insight. "You know, do you not?" The old gentleman pursed his lips and looked broodingly at him. "Leave it," he said again. Kit leaned slightly toward him, his hands clasped at his back. "You know," he said, "but Lauren does not. Why? What happened?" "She was a child, that was why," the Baron said irritably. "She had a good home with Kilbourne and his countess. She was happy and secure. She had companions of her own age and good prospects. She was only 3 when her mother left, little more than a baby. She quickly forgot her, as children do. Kilbourne and his wife became her parents. She could not have asked for better. You can see for yourself that the Dowager Lady Kilbourne loves her every bit as much as she loves her own daughter." "You believe that Lauren did not miss her mother?" Kit was still frowning. "That she did not feel abandoned? That she did not suffer when the infrequent letters and gifts stopped coming?" "Of course she did not." Baron Galton spoke firmly and turned to resume walking. "She never once asked. She never spoke of her mother. She never stopped being as serene and happy as she had always been. You may wonder how I can be so sure when I visited her only rarely. I love my granddaughter Ravensburg. I dote on her. She is all I have of my own. I would have had her to live with me at the snap of 2 fingers, but it would have been selfish of me. She was happier where she was. I wrote weekly to Kilbourne until his death, and he wrote weekly to me. Lauren was a model child, and then a model young lady. She was rarely as ever disobedient. She never neglected her lessons or her other duties. She was never discontented or demanding. She was less trouble than either of Kilbourne's own children. There was no need to upset her unnecessarily with news of a mother she had long forgotten. Kilbourne knew the truth too, then? Kit asked. Of course he did, Baron Bolton replied. Forget about your inquiries, Ravensburg, and forget about upsetting my granddaughter by dredging up what is long in the past. Leave it be. What did happen? Kit asked. The old gentleman sighed. I suppose, he said, you have a right to know. I would have felt it my duty to inform you before you committed yourself to a betrothal to Lauren, had you given me an opportunity to do so. But I was presented with the fait accompli instead. My daughter was as unlike my granddaughter as it is possible to be, Ravensburg. She was always a great trial to her mother and me. She married Wycliffe, just to be free of us, I believe, though I approved the match. She led him a merry dance. It was something of a scandal when she married Wyatt, a mere 10 months after Whitleaf's death. By some miracle, though, that very marriage gave Lauren a good steady home, where she was soon loved for herself. I never heard one murmur from either Kilbourne or his countess about bad blood, and they were quite as eager for the match between their son and my granddaughter as I was. They walked in silence for a while. Kit offered no comment that might distract his companion's train of thought. Their wedding trip turned into a permanent way of life. Lord Bolton continued eventually. She, Miriam, was forever wanting Lauren to join them, but I flatly refused to send her, and Kilbourne backed me on that decision. She was no fit mother, and they lived no fitting style of life for a child. There were forever rumors about their wild excesses and debaucheries, brought home by other travellers. Finally, Ravensburg, when they were in India, she left Wyatt in order to take up residence with some fabulously wealthy Indian potentate, and he resumed his travels with a Frenchwoman of questionable reputation. He died 5 years later, 10 years ago, somewhere in South America. Kilbourne did not go into public mourning, mainly for Lauren's sake. He did not want to have to hurt her with explanations. She was 16 years old at the time, an impressionable age. Good God, and Mrs. Wyatt? Kit asked. The last I heard, she was still in India, with some official of the East India Company, Baron Bolton said curtly. She writes once or twice a year, usually to Lauren. She is dead to me, Ravensburg, and by damn she will remain dead to my granddaughter if I have any say in the matter. You, or Kilbourne, have kept her mother's letters from her. You do not believe she should know the truth, Kit asked, that her mother is still alive? I do not. The house was well in sight. It had been a lengthy walk for an elderly gentleman who obviously did not indulge in a great deal of exercise. He was breathing heavily. Perhaps, he said sternly, you feel you have made a bad bargain in your choice of bride, Ravensburg, but it was your choice to rush into a betrothal, and by God you will treat her kindly, or you will have me to answer to for as long as I am spared from my grave. You need not worry about that, sir, Kit said. I love your granddaughter. The lie was spoken without thought, but it could not be recalled. And it was not such a great untruth, was it? He had grown enormously fond of Lauren. He had lain awake half the night before, thinking about her, wishing she were there in the bed beside him, cold, warm, and relaxed, and asleep against him, as she had in the hut and on the island, realizing that after she left, there was going to be a yawning emptiness in his life for some time to come. The idea of actually marrying her was becoming more and more appealing to him. The need somehow to persuade her to marry him was becoming more and more imperative, quite aside from the fact that she might be with child by him. Yet how could he coerce her when it seemed that the greatest gift he could give her was her freedom? Then you will protect her from the sordid truth, Baron Bolton said, as I have done, as the late Kilbourne and his countess and their son have done. If you love her, you will never breathe a word to her of what really happened to her mother. She is far happier in her ignorance. Yes, of course, sir. I will do all in my power to protect her. But she was not happy, he thought. All those who had loved her all her life were wrong about that. She had cultivated obedience and gentility and placidity in order to hide the hurt of being a child unwanted by her own mother. She had made herself into the perfect lady to win the love of her adopted family, so that they too would not abandon her. She believed her grandfather had not wanted the bother of caring for her. She believed, rightly it seemed, that her father's family had openly rejected her. She was not happy. She had lived behind the mask for so long, for at least 23 of her 26 years, that even those nearest and dearest to her seemed to believe that the mask was the reality. Perhaps he was the only person on this earth who had seen the eager, vital, laughter-loving, sensual, truly beautiful woman who was the real Lauren Edgeworth. But it was indeed a sordid story. Under the circumstances, perhaps her grandfather and the Kilbournes had made the right decision to keep it from her. What would it do to her to discover now that her mother still lived, that she was, apparently, promiscuous, that she had never stopped writing to her daughter, that she had wanted Lauren to live with her? No. Kit stopped walking again. They were very close to the house. No, sir, I cannot agree with you. Lauren has suffered from not knowing. She would suffer too from knowing. Perhaps it would be a kindness to keep the truth from her, to protect her because she is a lady and has lived a sheltered life. But I don't believe so. I believe she has the right to know. You would tell her then, Baron Galton asked, clearly angry, when I have spoken to you in strictest confidence? Kit looked steadily back at him. Yes, I believe I will, sir, he said, if I am given no alternative. I will tell her the truth after I marry her, not before then. I beg you to do it. The story should come from you. She needs the truth. You need to trust her with it. You need to set her free. Free. The old gentleman frowned. He drew breath to say more, but closed his mouth again. Please, sir, Kit asked softly. 19. Lauren had fully expected the day before the Dowager's birthday to be a busy one, since she had committed herself to helping the Countess with the last-minute preparations. But looking back on it later, she marveled that any day could be so eventful and still contain only 24 hours. She had never lived through a more tumultuous, emotion-packed day. It began after breakfast, when she was already busy with the Countess in the latter's private sitting room, drawing up a written schedule for the next day's division of labor. The Earl and Countess would officially greet all comers during the afternoon, outdoors if weather permitted, and judge all the contests that had been announced in the village and the surrounding countryside a month or more ago. Kit and Lauren would organize and run the children's races. The Countess would. But there was a knock on the door, and at the Countess's summons it opened to reveal an apologetic Aunt Clara with Gwen behind her. I am so sorry to interrupt you, Lady Redfield, Aunt Clara said, lifting her right hand to reveal an opened letter. But I simply could not wait to let Lauren know the news. Lauren got to her feet. She had noticed Gwen's suppressed excitement at the same moment as she saw the ducal crest at the head of the letter. The Duke of Portfrey's crest, that was. Elizabeth has been delivered safely of a boy, Aunt Clara announced, before they all disgraced themselves by falling into one another's arms and laughing and crying and exclaiming. The Duchess of Portfrey? The Countess asked, getting to her feet and hugging Lauren. Well, this news is as good an excuse for an interruption of work as any I have heard. Do sit down, ladies, and I will have a pot of chocolate brought up. I'm quite sure Lauren is ready to hear every sentence of that letter. If she is not, I am. The Duke had written that his son and heir had arrived earlier than expected, but with 10 fingers and 10 toes, a powerful set of lungs, and a voracious appetite. Elizabeth was recovering well after a long and difficult delivery. As soon as mother and child could safely travel, he was intending to take them to Newbury Abbey, so that the newborn Marquis of Watford could become acquainted with Lily, his half-sister, and Elizabeth could be fussed over by her own family for a month or so. "Oh, Lauren," Gwen said, tightening her grasp on her cousin's hands, "Mamma and I must go home early to prepare for their arrival. Not that we will need to do anything, of course. Lily and Nev will have everything well under control. The Duke is Lily's father, after all, and the baby her half-brother. And Elizabeth is Neville's aunt, as much as she is mine. But," she smiled, still dewy-eyed, "but of course you will want to be there when the portraits arrive," the Countess said. "That is perfectly understandable. I just hope you will remain for the birthday celebrations tomorrow." "We would not miss them for any consideration," Aunt Clara assured her. "But perhaps the day after tomorrow we'll be on our way. Lauren, you must stay and—" "But of course she will stay." The Countess leaned over to pat Lauren's knee. "I am beginning to wonder how I ever managed without the help and support of a daughter. I am going to find it difficult to relinquish her, Lady Kilbourne, though I must eventually allow her to return to Newbury to make plans for the wedding." "Yes, indeed," Aunt Clara agreed, and the two older ladies indulged in a comfortable cause on the subject of weddings, while Gwen winked and smiled fondly at Lauren, and Lauren felt wretched. If only she had stopped to think during that infamous tete-a-tete in Vauxhall. It was later in the morning, as Lauren was returning from the rose arbor with the Dowager and Lady Irene, that she found Kit and her grandfather standing out on the terrace, obviously awaiting her approach, both looking almost grim. Aunt Clara's decision to return home the day after tomorrow with Gwen had made Lauren very aware that her task here had been completed, and there was really no further need to linger. But seeing him now, knowing that she must leave soon and then never see him again, made her feel decidedly queasy. She smiled. "Take a little walk with us, Lauren," her grandfather said, after exchanging courtesies with the older ladies. "Of course, Grandpapa," she said, taking his arm and looking inquiringly at Kit. His expression gave nothing away. They turned in the direction of the stables. "Aunt Clara has had a letter from the Duke of Portray," she said. "Yes, so we have heard," her grandfather said. Kit walked silently at her other side, his hands clasped behind him. "I have been anxious about Elizabeth," she said. "She is rather advanced in years to be having a child, and perhaps she herself was with child, she thought, not for the first time. What would happen if she was? She would have to marry Kit. He would have to marry her." They walked in silence until they were on the lawn beyond the stables, on their way to the lake. "What is wrong?" she asked. Her grandfather cleared his throat. "You have always been happy at Newbury Abbey, have you not, Lauren?" he asked. "They always treated you well? You never felt that the Earl and Countess resented you in any way, loved you less than their own children?" "Grandpapa?" She looked at him, puzzled. "You know I have always been happy there. You know they have always been kindness itself to me, all of them. That year was unfortunate. Neville had told me not to wait for him when he went to war. He truly believed when he came back that Lily was dead. He would not in a million years have hurt me deliberately. Why are you—" But he was passing her hand and clearing his throat again. "Did you ever think of your mother?" he asked her. "Ever feel sad that she was not there with you? Ever feel hurt that she did not return? Ever feel that she had abandoned you?" "Grandpapa?" "Did you?" he asked. She thought of denial. Denial was second nature to her. What had made him even ask the questions? And why was Kit with them, a silent presence at her other side? She was tired of denial, mortally weary of it, and of so much else in her life too. "Yes," she said, "yes to all of your questions." He drew in his breath and let it out on a sigh. "And did you ever think I did not want you with me?" he asked. Ah, sometimes the truth was impossible to tell. Sometimes it would hurt. "You were alone, Grandpapa," she said, "and not a young man. Having a child with you all the time would have been a heavy burden. I did not blame you. I never did that. I have always known that you love me. Sometimes I ached to have you with me, he said. When I used to visit you, I used to dream of taking you home with me, of your asking me to take you, so that doing so would not have seemed so selfish. But you were far happier where you were, among younger people, with other children. Grandpapa? Sometimes, he said, children are quiet and obedient and good-natured, and one assumes they are perfectly happy. Sometimes one can be wrong. I was wrong, was I not? Oh no, she cried. I was happy, Grandpapa. I have to tell you about your mother, he said. They had reached the bank of the lake, the spot where everyone had bathed after the cricket match. It was quiet now, deserted. What did he mean? I have to tell you about your mother. They were standing side by side, close to the water's edge. She was no longer holding his arm. He had strolled away to lean against a tree trunk, but he was well within hearing distance. Lauren felt cold and inexplicably frightened suddenly. What about her? She asked, and then he told her. There was a slight breeze, enough to cause ripples on the surface of the lake. It had been like glass all 3 times she had bathed in it. The sky was dotted with moving clouds. It was amazing how variegated the colors of water could be, and of sky. Someone must have taken the children out for a walk. Their voices, shouting, shrieking, and laughing, were coming from somewhere far off. Kit, propped against the tree, did not move except to cross his arms over his chest. The grandfather cleared his throat but did not speak. It was Lauren who broke the silence that had succeeded his story. She is alive. A rhetorical question. He answered it anyway. Yes, or was until recently. There have been letters from her ever since I last heard from her when I was 11. It was better that you thought her dead, Lauren. Kilbourne and I were agreed on that. She wanted me to join them during their travels. You were far better off where you were. She was alive. She had wanted Lauren with her. She was alive. She had kept on writing. She was in India, where she had lived with at least 2 men who were not her husband. She was alive. She was alive. The letters, she asked, suddenly frantic. The letters, Grandpapa, did you destroy them? No. They still exist? All her letters to me? 15 years' worth of letters? 32 of them, he said, his voice flat and heavy. I have them all unopened. She pressed one hand to her mouth then and closed her eyes tightly. She felt herself swaying, then felt strong steadying hands close about her up arms from behind. I think it would be best if you were to return to the house, sir, Kit said. Go and rest. I'll take care of her. You see, her father's voice was distressed, accusing. It was the wrong thing to do. Damn you, Ravensburg, it was the wrong thing. She pulled herself back from what felt like a long, dark tunnel down which she was falling, but she did not open her eyes. It was not the wrong thing, Grandpapa, she said. It was not wrong. She could sense rather than hear him walk away. Then Kit tucked one arm very firmly about her waist and drew her against his side before strolling with her farther along the bank of the lake. She dipped her head sideways to rest on his shoulder. She is alive, she said. Yes. She wanted me. She loved me. Yes. And she has never stopped loving me. No. She stumbled and he tightened his arm even more firmly about her. They had come to a stop on the particularly lovely stretch of the bank, with cultivated beds of anemones beyond the grassy bank and trees beyond them. Across the lake, the Temple Folly was visible. Kit, she said. Kit. Yes, my love. She wept, long and helplessly, a storm of weeping. Grief for the lonely, wounded child she had been. For the girl who had felt so very alone, even though she had been surrounded by love, showered with it at every turn. For the terrible cruelty of love, from people who had loved her. for the mother who was not dead, who had loved her enough to write 32 unanswered letters over 15 years, who could never come home because she had behaved in ways that were unforgivable in English polite society. He had scooped her up and sat down on the grass with her. He held her on his lap, cuddled her, cradled her in his sheltering arms, crooned nonsense into her ear. She was quiet at last. The sun, peeking out from behind a cloud, shone full on the white marble of the folly. Its bright reflection shivered in the water beneath. Was it the wrong thing to do? Kit asked softly. No. She blew her nose in her handkerchief, put it back in her pocket, and settled her head against his shoulder again. You must have removed her bonnet when they sat down. The people we love are usually stronger than we give them credit for. It is the nature of love, perhaps, to want to shoulder all the pain rather than see the loved one suffer. But sometimes pain is better than emptiness. I have been so empty, Kit, all my life, so full of emptiness. That is a strange paradox, is it not? Full of emptiness? He kissed her temple. It was you, was it not? She said. You talked Grandpapa into it. I advised him to tell you, he admitted. Thank you. She snuggled closer. Oh, Kit, thanked you. He kissed her temple again, and when she lifted her face, he kissed her mouth. I must look a dreadful fright, she said. He drew his head back and looked closely at her. Good Lord, he said. You do. I'm going to have to muster all my courage not to run screaming back to the house. She laughed. Silly. He was going to have wrinkles at the corners of his eyes long before he was an old man, she thought, as they crinkled with laughter. And that was only the beginning of her eventful day. Tomorrow was going to be a day for guests and organized celebrations. Today would be for family. It was what they all agreed upon during luncheon, though it was Sydenham who suggested a picnic out at the hill where the wilderness walk ended. The idea was greeted with enthusiasm and immediately acted upon. The mothers of young children went up to the nursery to get their children ready. Most of the other adults retired to their rooms to change their clothes. Sydenham strode off to the stables to have the gig prepared, since he had persuaded his grandmother, with the help of a chorus of supporting pleas from various cousins, to come too. And Lauren and Marjorie Clifford descended to the kitchens to cajole the cook into preparing a picnic tea and a couple of footmen into conveying it out to the hill. The top of the hill was the highest point in the park and afforded a wide prospect over the surrounding countryside in every direction. For that reason, the designer of the park and the wilderness walk had decided that there would be no trees up there and no elaborate folly to obstruct the view. What he had done instead was build a hermit's cavern into the side of the hill, close to the top. There never had been a hermit, of course, but the children loved it. They were first to scramble to the top. Everyone else toiled up more slowly. The whole family had come without exception. Frederick and Roger Butler cupped their hands together at the bottom of the slope and carried their grandmother to the top, despite her protests, after she had been helped out of the gig. Boris Clifford had set up a chair for her on the summit, and now had plumped up a cushion for her back. Lawrence Fremont and Kit carried Lady Irene up, while Claude and Daphne Willard prepared her chair. The elderly sisters-in-law sat side by side, like twin queens on their thrones, Clarence Butler remarked. Lauren raised their parasols for them, and Gwendolen helped Marianne spread blankets on the grass for any other adults who cared to sit and recover from the walk. Kit sat down and prepared simply to enjoy himself. Lauren, he noticed, was pink-cheeked and bright-eyed, and looking remarkably pretty. After they had returned from the lake earlier, she had gone up to her grandfather's room and remained there with him until luncheon. She had come down on the old gentleman's arm, and had been looking noticeably happy ever since. He could not stop himself from remembering some of the words she had spoken. I have been so empty, Kit. All my life, so full of emptiness. It was such a relief to know that he had done the right thing in persuading Baron Galton to tell her what he knew of her mother, to know that he had done some good in his life. But there was not a great deal of time for reflection or recovery from the walk and climb. The children, who were perfectly well able to play with one another, could not resist the attraction of a whole host of idle adults, who surely could not possibly have anything better to do than play with them. Before many minutes had passed, it was no longer good enough for bandits and crusading warriors to creep up by foot on dragons and kidnapped maidens and hidden robbers in the cavern. Horses were required, and of course adult male cousins and uncles, and occasionally fathers, made splendid steeds. Kit galloped around the hilltop for all of half an hour, with an assortment of youngsters on his back. But the ladies were not exempt. He saw just before the elder children tired of that particular game. Lauren and Beatrice and Lady Muir had been coaxed to their feet by some of the infants, and were playing some circle game with them, all their hands joined. Ring around the rosy, he guessed, when they all fell down. Lauren was laughing, and little Anna jumped on her, followed by David and Sarah. She wrapped her arms about them while their mother scolded and told them not to hurt Lauren. But their attention was soon distracted. Young Benjamin had discovered that the slope behind the hill was broken halfway down by a wide flap ledge before it continued its descent to the plain below, and that the upper slope was just long enough and smooth enough and grassy enough to be perfect for rolling down. He tested his theory with shrieks of exuberance, and soon all the tiring human horses were abandoned in favor of the new game. Even the little children could join in this one, and did. And then Sarah was tugging at Lauren's hand, while Kit watched grinning from a short distance away. She laughed and shook her head, but then David was pulling at her other hand, and she was walking closer to the edge of the slope. "Do it," Frederick called, distracted from the conversation he was having with Lady Muir. Sebastian put 2 fingers to his lips and whistled. Philip whooped. Everyone turned to look. Lauren was laughing. "I dare you," Roger said. She took off her bonnet, sat down on the grass, and then lay down and rolled to the bottom, all light muslin skirts and bare arms and trim ankles and tumbling dark curls and shrieking laughter. Kit stared after her, utterly enchanted, but it was Lady Muir, moving to his side and setting one hand on his sleeve, who voiced his thoughts. "That is Lauren," she said. "I can scarcely believe it. Lord Ravensburg, I blessed the moment she met you." Lauren was up on her knees, brushing the grass from her dress, looking upward and still laughing. "It would be a great deal easier," she said, "if one did not have arms to get in one's way." Yes, there had been that moment when they had met, that first moment in Hyde Park when their eyes had met. And there was this moment, when the truth finally burst in on him. Of course she had become precious to him. Of course she had. He was head over ears in love with her. He loved her. Sydenham was standing watching too. "Oh well," he called down cheerfully, "if a lack of arms makes for easier rolling, I should be halfway decent at it." And surrounded by shrieking, exuberant children who were absorbed in their own pleasure, he rolled down the hill to come to rest a few feet from Lauren. Kit Kent's, while all around him the relatives whistled and applauded. And then as Sid scrambled to his feet and offered his hand to Lauren, he looked up at Kit, and their eyes met. He was laughing. They toiled up the slope, hand in hand, while the children continued the game, and most of the adults turned their attention to the approach of their tea from the opposite direction. They stood before Kit, still hand in hand. There was a moment of awkwardness. "I need to tell you," Sydenham said, his voice pitched low so that only Kit and Lauren would hear, "that I lied to you, Kit. When I told you the night you came home that I wanted nothing of you, you asked me if that included your love. I said yes. I lied." Kit swallowed hard, terrified that the sudden ache in his throat would translate into tears that everyone would see. "I see," he said stiffly. "I'm glad." This, he thought, was the first time Sid had spoken voluntarily to him, since that night 3 years ago, when he had told Kit to leave and not come back. Why was he holding Lauren's hand? He released it even as Kit thought it, smiled rather awkwardly, and would have turned away. "Sid," Kit said quickly, Lauren, looking most unlike her usual immaculate self, bonnetless, her hair untidy and strewn with grass, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright, linked one arm through Sid's and one through his, and turned to stroll away from the chairs and blankets and rolling, noisy children. "I have been thinking," Kit said, "about something Lauren said this morning. I have not been able to get it out of my head, in fact, even though she was not talking about either you or me, Sid. She said that the people we love are usually stronger than we give them credit for. You are you not? And God knows I love you." "Yes," Sid said. "And I humiliated you the other night, coming to your defense when Catherine wanted you to waltz with her." "Yes." "I suppose," Kit said, "it happens over and over again, with Mother and Father, with all your old friends and neighbors." "Yes," Sid admitted. "But with you most of all, Kit." They did not descend the slope. They stood looking out across the fields below, across the pasture where Kit and Lauren had raced a few days before. "You are an artist, Sid." Pain was back in his frozen chest, the terrible impotent pity for the brother he had adored from childhood on. "But you are condemned to be a steward." "Yes," Sid said. "It has not been easy to adjust. Perhaps the adjustment will never be fully made. Perhaps being an excellent steward will never quite make up for the fact that I can never paint again. But it is my problem, Kit, my adjustment to make. This is my body, my life. I'll cope with it. I have done rather well so far. I would appreciate a little credit. I don't need your pity, only your love." Lauren still had an arm linked through each of theirs, creating a physical connection between them, a sort of bridge, Kit thought, realizing suddenly that it was quite deliberate. Her hand crept into his, and she laced her fingers with his. "I can't forgive myself," Kit said. "I can't, Sid. You ought never to have been in the peninsula. You certainly ought not to have been on that mission with me. It was my carelessness that led us into that trap. And then I left you to suffer. This, while I escaped. Don't tell me it is your life and not my concern. It is my concern. I doomed you to half a life and got off scot-free myself. I would find that almost insulting if I did not recognize your agony," Sydenham said. "Kit, I chose to become an officer. I chose to be a reconnaissance officer. The trap was unforeseeable. I volunteered to be the decoy." Was that true? Of course it was. But did it make a difference? Had Sid had any choice? If he had not volunteered, Kit would have had to command him to take that role. Sid had saved him from having to do that. "I'll not say I enjoyed what followed," Sydenham continued. "It was sheer hell, in fact. But I was proud of myself, Kit. I had finally proved myself your equal, and Jerome's. Perhaps I'd even surpassed both of you. In my conceit, I expected you to be proud of me, too. I expected when you brought me home that you would tell everyone here how proud you were. I thought you would have extolled my courage and endurance. It was very conceited of me." "And instead, I belittled you," Kit said quietly, "by taking all the blame and focusing everyone's attention on myself, as I went noisily mad. I made you seem no better than a victim." "Yes," Sydenham said. "I have always been proud of you," Kit said. "You did not have to prove anything, Sid. You are my brother." They stood gazing out across the countryside, the breeze at their backs, the noise of merry voices and laughter behind them. Kit chuckled softly. "You were talking about me, Lauren," he said. "What else did you say this morning?" "It is the nature of love, perhaps, to want to shoulder all the pain rather than see the loved one suffer. In some ways, Sid, my role was as hard as yours. That may seem insulting, but there is truth in it. Yes, I know, his brother agreed. I have always been thankful that I was not the one appointed to escape. I could not have borne to see you like this. It is easier to suffer something oneself than see a loved one do it. I don't know about either of you, Lauren said after a short pause, but I am very hungry. Kit turned his head to smile at her, and then met his brother's eye beyond her. He wondered if he looked as sheepish as Sid did, and decided that he probably did. Come on, Sid, he said. Let's see how well you can eat chicken with just one hand, and the left one to boot. I have one distinct advantage if it is greasy, Sid replied. I have only one hand to wash afterward. Kit pressed his fingers tightly about Lauren's, and blessed again the moment he had looked up from kissing the milkmaid to find himself locking glances with the prim, shocked Lauren Edgeworth. Except that she might yet break their engagement. 20. Lauren stood at her bedchamber window, still in her nightgown, gazing out on what promised to be a lovely day. There was not a cloud in the sky. The tree branches were still, suggesting that if there was a wind at all, it was the merest breeze. All the anxiously conceived alternate plans for the day's festivities, if it rained, could be abandoned. The Countess would be so relieved. All was going to be perfect for the Dowager's birthday. Tomorrow, Aunt Clara and Gwen were returning to Newbury. Grandpapa, too, had decided to return home to Yorkshire. He was going to send the bundle of letters from Lauren's mother by special messenger to Newbury. She had asked him to send them there rather than here. She had come here to help Kit avoid an unwanted betrothal. She had done that. She had come to help reconcile him to his family, who had rejected him and sent him away 3 years ago. She had done that. She had done it in time for this birthday, and could feel confident that Kit would be able to celebrate fully and happily with his family, and they with him. There was really nothing left to do. She had come for a little adventure, for a taste of life as other people lived it, those who had not disciplined all spontaneity, all joy out of their lives. She had found adventure in abundance. She had bathed and swum in the lake, once naked. She had climbed a tree to the higher branches. She had raced on horseback. She had played with children and rolled down a steep slope with them. Very tiny adventures indeed. She had gone outside alone one night and spent what remained of it in a hut with Kit. She had slept with him on a narrow bed. She had lain with him on one of the velvet benches in the portrait gallery and given him her virginity. She had lain with him among the wildflowers on the island and made love with him. A momentous adventure. The sound of laughter and voices had her leaning closer to the window and peering downward. Philip and Penelope Willard, Crispin and Mary Ann Butler, were on their way out for an early morning walk. The day was beginning. The laughed day. There was no more to be experienced. Already there had been too much, far too much. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. Tomorrow she would leave with Aunt Clara and Gwen, though she was not going to tell anyone until today was over. If she did not go soon, then she might stay forever, and that would be dishonorable. She would not cling to what she had found. All her life she had clung with all her might to her only hope of permanent belonging and security. A marriage with Neville. And when that anchor had been snatched from her, she had drifted on a vast, dark, threatening ocean, frightening in its emptiness. She would not cling now, even though she knew Kit's honor would urge him into encouraging her to do just that, even though she knew he had grown fond of her. She did not need to cling, not to anyone. She could and would stand alone. This time her heart would not break, even though it would hurt and hurt for a long time to come, perhaps for the rest of her life, but it would not break. She had the strength to go on alone. She had learned something of limitless value years Aldersley, and she had Kit to thank. It was such a simple, such an earth-shatteringly profound lesson. The world, she had discovered, her world, would not explode into chaos if Lauren Edgeworth laughed. There was a scratching on the door behind her, and she turned with a smile to watch her maid come in with her morning cup of chocolate. The morning was to be for the family alone, the calm before the proverbial storm, as it were. They all went into the village for a celebratory service at the church. The plan was that the dowager would then return home in the first carriage in order to rest quietly in her private apartments for a few hours before the afternoon festivities began. It was a return that was delayed by nearly half an hour. Almost the whole village had spilled out of doors to gather about the churchyard gateway to cheer the dowager and pay their respects and pelt her with flower petals. She would see them all again during the afternoon, but she insisted upon stopping to talk to a number of them. No easy feat for her, and to hand out coins to the children. Finally, she was on her way, Lady Irene beside her. A long line of carriages, barouches, and curricles moved steadily forward to pick up the rest of the family. Kit took Lauren by the elbow. "Will you mind walking back to the house?" he asked. "Of course not." She turned her head to smile at him. Her bonnet and the ribbons that trimmed her light muslin dress exactly matched her eyes. She looked very fetching indeed. "I want to look at something," he told her. He had sat down with his father the night before, after everyone else had gone to bed, and Sid too had stayed on his window seat, a silent listener through most of the conversation that had followed. Kit had begun it by apologizing for his behavior 3 years before. "It is best forgotten," his father had said. "It is over." But Kit had disagreed, and they had talked awkwardly at first, with growing ease as time went on. "I sent you away," his father said at one point. "I never meant it to be forever. I never used the word banishment. That was your interpretation, Kit. But I was content to let it stand. I was as stubborn as a mule. You take after me there. When you did not write, your mother wanted me to do it, but I would not. Jerome pleaded with me to do it, but I would not. Neither would he, of course, or your mother. What a parcel of fools we all were, all of us. You too. Family quarrels are the very worst kind. They are so very difficult to end. Jerome wanted you to write to me." There had been an understanding between Jerome and Freya for several years, apparently. It had been one of those courtships that no one had been in any particular hurry to bring to fruition. But then Kit had come home, half raving and in a towering rage at the whole world, most of all himself. His family had watched helplessly as he flung himself into passionate pursuit of Freya, which in their opinion had nothing whatever to do with love. Jerome had been particularly alarmed and had ridden over to discuss the matter with Bewcastle, and with Freya herself. His announcement of their betrothal at dinner had been the result, followed of course by Kit's fight, first with him and then with Ranulph. "He never blamed you or held a grudge, you know, Kit," the Earl said. "He blamed himself for going about things entirely the wrong way. He should have had a talk with you, tried to explain. He used to say afterward. He should have tried to get you to vent your anger, brother to brother. Though there was really no talking to you that summer, Kit. After you were gone, he kept putting off the nuptials. He wanted you here. He wanted peace with you before he married Freya. He wanted to know that you had realized she was not the woman for you. He wanted me to write to you. But he was too stubborn to do it himself. And then, Kit said, we all run out of time. Yes. He never stopped loving you, Kit, Sid said, speaking up at last. None of us did. And you must stop punishing yourselves now. It has gone on long enough, for all of us. It was years since Kit had been to the family plot behind the church. His grandfather had been his childhood idol. Kit had visited his grave regularly for a number of years after his death. But he had not been here since he was 18, since his commission had been purchased. This is where the family ancestors are buried, he told Lauren, leading her through the gateway between the two halves of the low, neatly clipped hedge that separated the plot from the rest of the churchyard. I have not been here for 11 years. He found his grandfather's grave immediately. There were fresh roses in the marble bars before the headstone. His grandmother had come here after the picnic yesterday with her 2 sons and her daughter. There were roses in the bars before another headstone too, the one that had not been here 11 years ago. Kit moved toward it and stood at the foot of the grave, reading the headstone. Only 2 words out of all those written there leapt out at him. Jerome Butler. His hand was in Lauren's, he realized suddenly, their fingers tightly laced. It was probably hurting her. He eased his hand free and set his arm lightly about her shoulders. My brother, he said unnecessarily. Yes, I loved him. Yes. He had been afraid that standing here he would be overwhelmed by bitter regret, remembering their last encounter, knowing that they had been unreconciled when Jerome died. But it really did not matter, he found now. Love did not die just because of a quarrel. And a relationship was not a linear thing, the last incident defining the whole of it. They had been close, the 3 of them, Jerome, Kit, Sid. They had played and fought and laughed together. They had been brothers. They were brothers. He had been afraid he would break down with inconsolable grief at seeing, finally, the indisputable evidence of Jerome's non-existence. He was dead. His remains were beneath the ground here. Kit smiled. He used to tease me, he said, when I came home on leave, and he would have heard of yet another dispatch in which I had been singled out for commendation. I would die a gloriously heroic death, he used to say, when Mother was not around to hear him say it, of course, and there would be no living down my memory. It would be insufferable. I think it might have amused him if he could have known that he was the one destined for the heroism and the death. There are worse ways to die, Kit, Lauren said. Yes, there are. It seemed too much of death to cling to any illusion that it was reserved for old age. Goodbye, brother. Rest in peace. He had to blink then, several times, and he had to release the pressure of his grip on Lauren's shoulder. She was leaning against him. Her arm was about his waist. Perhaps, after all, he thought, he had not lost the right to grasp hold of whatever remained of life and live it to the best of his ability. Jerome had lived his life. Sid was living his. They were his brothers, and he would love them both to his dying breath. But when all was said and done, he could live only his own life. He had done his share of foolish, even wrong things. But who has not? He had the freedom to live on and try to do better. It was all he could do. He felt suddenly strangely happy. Let's go home, he said. Yes. He took her hand in his and drew it through his arm. The afternoon brought friends and neighbors and tenants and laborers and villagers, people of all classes from miles around, in fact, to the lawns of Aldersley for a garden party that was enlivened with contests of all descriptions for all ages. Lauren had her part to play, almost her final part, and played it to the full. While the Earl and Countess judged the needlework and baking and woodworking contests, and the Dowager listened to the poetry contestants proclaim their verses, but refused to judge them because all the poems had been written in her honor. They were drawing a great deal of attention and much laughter. Lauren and Kid organized the races and other physical contests. There were foot races and sack races and 3-legged races for the children, though Kit ran the latter too with young Doris, there having been an uneven number of would-be contestants. There was a batting contest for the young boys with the cricket bat and ball. There was a wood-chopping contest for the young men and an archery contest too, though the winner of that was the sole female entrant, Lady Morgan Bedwyn, who had ridden over to Aldersley with Lord Allain. She would not be at the ball in the evening, she admitted haughtily when pressed, because Bewcastle had the Gothic notion that at 16 she was too young. She threatened to put an arrow between Lord Allain's eyes when he laughed. There was tea for everyone when it was all over, and Lauren circulated among the visitors, plate in hand, making sure that she had a friendly word with almost everyone who had come. But she was feeling hot and nearly exhausted. How was she ever to find the energy to dance during the evening? It was a feeling shared by others, it seemed. The Earl, after the final visitor had left, suggested that they all retire to their rooms for a rest. He would see to it, but a bell was rung loudly enough to rouse them all in time to dress for dinner and the ball. "Come for a walk?" Kit asked Lauren, taking her hand in his. A walk was the last thing she needed, but it was her final day, and already it was late afternoon. There could be panic in the thought if she allowed herself to dwell upon it. But there was still a little time left, this evening and the rest of this afternoon. She smiled. He did not take her far. At first, when he set out in the direction of the lake, she hoped that perhaps he would take her to the island again. She hoped that perhaps they would make love one more time. But although part of her longed for it, she was not sorry when he led her only as far as a secluded spot where they had stood yesterday, across from the temple. The sun was in such a position in the sky that the surrounding trees shaded the bank. "What a busy day," she said, sinking to the grass beside him. "I hope it will not prove too tiring for your grandmother." "She is lapping up every moment of it," he said, stretching out on his back and closing his eyes. Lauren took off her straw bonnet and lay down beside him. He felt for her hand and held it in his. It felt so natural now, she thought, to be alone together like this and to touch each other with casual gestures of affection, and seductively comforting. He did not want to talk, it seemed, neither did she. She wanted to concentrate on this, perhaps the final time alone together. She wanted to memorize it so that she could call it to mind any time she wished to in future. It was a memory she would avoid for a long time, she suspected, as being just too painful a reminder of a brief summer when life had come vividly alive and love had been born with startling unexpectedness. But eventually, she would remember this lazy heat, the cool springiness of the grass, the smell of flowers, the droning of insects, the warmth of his hand. She slept. She swathed at the ant or whatever it was, crawling across her nose and trying to wake her when she had no wish to awake. But it was a persistent insect and trailed boldly across her nose again. She brushed it away crossly, and then someone chuckled softly and kissed her warmly on the lips. "It was you," she accused sleepily, seeing the telltale blade of grass in his upraised hand. "Horrid you." "There is a ball to attend, Sleeping Beauty," he said. "That was Cinderella." Her eyes drifted closed again. Wrong story. Sleeping Beauty did not attend any balls. She was allowed to sleep for 100 years. "I wonder," he said, "if she was this cross with the prince who kissed her." She opened her eyes and smiled at him again. "Was I really sleeping?" "Snoring like thunder," he said. "I could not snatch a wink myself." "Silly," she sighed with contentment. For the moment, she had forgotten that this was the final day. "Lauren," he said, "I would like to have our wedding days announced tonight." She was finally, irrevocably awake. "No, Kit." "Why not?" he asked. "We are betrothed, and I thought you had perhaps grown fond of me, and of my family. You must know I have grown fond of you." "Yes." She lifted a hand to push aside a lock of hair that had fallen over his forehead. It fell back as soon as she had removed her hand. "But it was not part of our bargain, Kit." "To hell with our bargain." "Don't talk like that," she said. "It is not nice language." "My abject apologies, Mom," he grinned at her. "Neither was it a part of our bargain that we indulge in carnal relations. We must marry, you know. You may very well be with child." "I hope I am not," she said. "It would spoil everything. I think a wonderful thing has happened here, Kit, much more than we could ever have anticipated. I believe we have helped set each other free, really free, not just of certain social restraints, but of all that has held us back from happiness. For years in your case, all my life in mine. We must not snare each other now before we have even had a chance to test our wings." He stared down at her, his eyes suddenly blank and unfathomable. "Is that what you really think?" he asked her. "That we have found our separate freedoms? That marriage with each other would be an undesirable trap?" Yes, it was what she believed, with her intellect. Her heart was a different matter altogether, but her heart had no part at all in their bargain, and it would be grossly unfair to explain that fondness was no basis for marriage. It had been altogether enough for her once, but Kit was not Neville. He was not someone with whom she had grown up as a sister grows up with a brother. Kit was different. Fondness would not be enough with him, not when there was something much different from fondness on the one side. "It is what I really think," she said, forcing herself to look steadily back into his eyes. "It was our bargain, remember? That for you the betrothal would be real, that in your gallantry you would try to persuade me not to break it, that for me it would be a charade, that I would break it when the time was right." "Not yet," he said quickly. She drew breath to tell him she would be leaving tomorrow, but did not say the words. "Not yet," she agreed softly, and he lay back on the grass again. She did not turn her head, but she knew that he stared at the sky as she did, sleep and relaxation forgotten, even though it was a long time before he got silently to his feet and reached down a hand to help her up. 21. After dinner, Lauren stood with Kit and the Earl and Countess in the receiving line at the ballroom doors. The Dowager was seated on a comfortable chair inside, surrounded on 3 sides by great banks of flowers. Her own private bower, she had said when she saw it. There she was greeted and kissed by everyone who passed and showered with gifts. There had been no rest at all for Lauren after returning from the lake. Apart from having to bathe and dress and have her hair done, she had taken it upon herself to help the Countess check the decorations the servants had worked upon during the afternoon. The ballroom was like a garden. It had been Lauren's idea to confine the colors to varying shades of pink and purple, together with white, and green, of course, so often neglected in floral arrangements. She definitely had a gift for color and design, the Countess had told her approvingly. It was not exactly the squeeze of a London ball, but the room was pleasingly full nonetheless before the dancing began. Most of the guests were not quite as fashionably dressed as their London counterparts would have been, or as bedecked with costly jewels, but all were wearing their best and looked bright and festive. She liked country gatherings better than town ones, Lauren decided, as Kit led her into the ballroom and onto the floor to signal the imminent opening of the ball. There was something warm and intimate about them. Kit looked very handsome in shades of grey and silver and white. She was wearing the violet gown she had worn to the Mannering ball, a deliberate choice. It seemed fitting somehow that she should wear it the last time she danced with him, as she had worn it the first. More than one of the guests, as well as a few family members, had commented on how well they complemented each other in appearance, on what a handsome couple they made. She was going to enjoy the evening, Lauren decided, as other couples gathered around them. Every single moment of it. Her maid was above stairs, packing her trunks, but there was this evening left. "You look particularly lovely tonight," Kit said, leaning a little closer, so that only she would hear his words. "And do I mistake, or—" "No, indeed I do not. Your gown really does match the color of your eyes." His own eyes laughed into hers. "Absurd," she smiled back. How much had happened since the first time he had spoken those words to her. And yet not so very much time had passed. He had been a roguish, unwelcome stranger then. Now he was, well, now he was Kit, and achingly dear to her. The music began, and she concentrated on the steps and figures of the quadrille. She could never be happier than she was at this moment, she thought, and realized in some shock that it was precisely what she had told herself on her wedding eve ball, when she had been in company with Neville. The day following that had been the bleakest of her whole life. She smiled more brightly and noticed that the Duke of Bewcastle had just stepped into the ballroom with his brothers and Lady Freya. Sleeping Beauty, Kit had called her this afternoon. She felt more like Cinderella, dancing at the ball with her prince, with the knowledge that midnight would inevitably come and turn everything into rags and pumpkins. But she had no glass slipper to leave behind on the stairs. Lauren had taken to the floor with Bewcastle, who was looking elegant, austere, almost satanic in black and white. She had never seen him dance at any assembly or ball before this. He did so now, it would seem, to allay any lingering suspicion there might be in the neighbourhood that he nursed some resentment against the Earl of Redfield and his family. Ralph was leading out Lady Muir, while Elaine bent his head close to Kit's grandmother to hear what she was saying. "May I have the honour, Freya?" Kit bowed to her and extended his hand. She was looking particularly handsome tonight, in gold satin overlaid with blonde lace. Her hair was tamed and dressed high on her head, with gold ornaments that gleamed in the candlelight. She was small, smaller than Lauren, but full of figure, quite voluptuous in fact. And she had the boldness, the energy, the vitality to which she had always responded. As they danced without talking, he tried to recreate in his mind and his emotions the madness that had possessed him 3 years before, when he had been consumed by passion for her. He could do it with his mind. She had always been his friend, and he had needed a friend that summer. A male friend would not do, as he had discovered when he had tried pouring out his woes to Ralph, and Ralph had told him rather impatiently not to be an ass. He had done his duty and also saved Sid's life, had he not? And brought him home? What did he find to blame himself for? Freya had shown no greater sympathy, but Freya was a woman. All his grief, all his anger, all his guilt had been converted to physical, sexual passion and focused on her person. If he had anything to remember with guilt from that summer, it was surely the way he had used Freya. It had been unconscious and quite unintentional, of course, but that was what had happened. She had been there and he had used her. "It is too warm in here," she said when the set was almost at an end. The words, typical of Freya, were issued almost like a challenge. "It is," he agreed. "It has been a hot day. It probably still is warm outside." "At least," she said, "the air must be fresh out there." "Do you want to find out?" He grinned at her. "You are not about to faint, are you?" She looked at him with mingled haughtiness and contempt. The ballroom was at the east side of the house, on the ground floor. The east entrance was close to it, and on such a warm night the doors stood open, and several guests had stepped outside, some merely to stand in the cooler air, a few to stroll among the parterres of the formal gardens. There was no one in the rose arbor, toward which Freya turned. Kit walked beside her, hoping she would turn back before they actually reached the arbor. "We need to talk," she said. The arbor it was then. She sat on the very seat where Lauren had sat the evening of her arrival at Ulversley, and Kit stood looking down at her, his hands clasped at his back. "What is it?" he asked. But he did not wait for her to reply. "Freya, allow me to apologize. For 3 years ago, you never did say you loved me, did you? You never did say you would marry me and come with me to follow the drum. It was all in my imagination. I had no right to come banging on the door at Lindsay Hall and to force that fight on Ralph and create such an atrocious scene. Please forgive me." She looked at him coolly. "How foolish you are, Kit," she said. "How utterly foolish." "You had an understanding with Jerome," he said. "You would not have married me." "Of course I would not," she said impatiently. "You were a younger son. I am the daughter of a Duke of Bewcastle." "Well then." How devastating those words would have sounded to him 3 summers ago. How relieved he was to hear them now. There was no permanent harm done then, was there? Did you love Jerome? "Oh, fool, Kit," she said softly. "Fool." He had known her for a long time. They had been close friends. Sometimes meanings did not have to be spelled out in words. "Freya," he began. "For what are you punishing yourself this time?" she asked him. "Still for Sydenham? For Jerome? Because you broke his nose and had no chance to beg his pardon before he died? You have become a bore, Kit. Just look at her. If you had chosen to flagellate yourself with a nail-studded club, you would not have been picking a worse punishment. She is primness and dullness personified. You have made your point, believe me. Now, what do you plan to do to extricate yourselves? For a brief moment, he closed his eyes. He had not expected this. He moved a little closer, fearful suddenly that they might be overheard. He lifted one foot to the seat beside her and draped one arm over his raised leg. Freya, he said, you are mistaken. Very mistaken, I'm afraid. There was one thing about Freya. She had never been slow of understanding, and it was quite against her nature to grovel, to beg, to weep, to make any sort of scene. She stared up at him, all cold haughtiness, and then she moved to jerk to her feet. No, don't. He grasped her shoulder. Don't hurry back without me. It might be noted and commented upon. Take my arm and we will return together. Perhaps we can smile. You, Kit, she said, getting to her feet more slowly and linking her arm through his, may go to hell. I hope you burn there. Better yet, I hope you live well into your 90s with your lady bride. I cannot imagine a more hellish sentence for a man of your nature. She lifted a smiling face to his. Freya had always been mistress of the feline smile. He did not respond. There was no point. Besides, he was reminded that if he did live into his 90s, 60 or so of those years were going to have to be lived without Lauren. Unless even yet he could get her to change her mind. Surely he could. Once this day was over, he would be able to concentrate all his assets upon coaxing her to love him. We must not snare each other now. He would not remember that she viewed marriage with him as a sort of imprisonment, as a loss of all her newly won freedom. He would teach her that there was more than one kind of freedom. Kit was nowhere in sight when the dance with the Duke of Bewcastle was over, but Gwen was approaching on Lord Ranulph's arm. Lauren smiled at them both. She would suggest to Gwen that they slip away for a few minutes to find a cool drink. It was a warm night, but Lord Ranulph gave her no opportunity to make the suggestion. He bowed to Lauren and asked for her hand in the next set. He was one of the few gentlemen of her acquaintance, she thought after she had accepted, who could make her feel almost diminutive. He really was a giant of a man. You are looking becomingly flushed, Miss Edgeworth, he said, with that look in his eyes that she had never been able quite to interpret. Was it mockery, or simply amusement? But one would hate to force you into further exertions too soon. Do come and stroll with me outside. She had absolutely no wish to walk outside with him, even though she knew there were several other guests out there to make all proper. But it was not a request he had made, she realized. He had drawn her arm through his and was moving purposefully out of the ballroom and toward the outer doors. Well, she decided, a little fresh air would feel good. He could be an amusing companion. He pointed out several of the neighbors and told her brief anecdotes about them. He was a keen observer of human nature, it seemed, and yet none of his observations were quite malicious. Lauren found herself feeling well entertained. They were strolling above the parterres in the direction of the rose arbor. Ah, he said softly when they were close, foiled. There is someone there before us, 2 persons actually. We must walk into the flower gardens instead. And he turned her into the parterres. You must have known even before coming out here, she realized, even before asking her for this set of dances, who was in the rose arbor. He had wanted her to know, to see for herself. Probably Lady Freya wanted it too. She was sitting on one of the seats. Kit, in a characteristic pose, stood close to her, one foot on the seat, one arm draped over his leg. The other hand was on her shoulder, bringing his head very close to hers. Lord Ranulph was recounting some other anecdote to which Lauren was not listening. He stopped, obviously without finishing. I beg your pardon, he said. I would not for worlds have had you see that. Would you not? She asked. Ladies did not call gentlemen liars. It is not what you think, he said. They have been friends all their lives, you know. They are still friends. You have seen for yourself how much they have in common, how they love to challenge each other and compete against each other, how much they come alive in each other's company. But there is no more to it than friendship, I do assure you. Lord Ranulph, she said, you were in the middle of a story. Please finish it. You need not concern yourself with what I think. My thoughts are private. You could not begin to guess their contents. Despite herself, she had been wavering in her resolves. She did not even realize it until now, when her determination to leave in the morning was strengthened, when staying even one more day was finally no option at all. It was a good thing this had happened, she thought, as Lord Ranulph at her side, far from completing the story he had begun earlier, fell silent. She had known that it would happen, of course, that it was inevitable. But now she had seen for herself and could entertain no niggling doubts, no faint hopes. She would not let it upset her. It would be vastly unfair to both Kit and herself. She had had her adventure, and now it had come to an end. It was understandable, but her spirits were rather flat after such a splendid adventure. But she would soon cheer up once she was back at Newbury. There would be her mother's letters to read, Elizabeth and the baby to fuss over, Lily to rejoice with. Oh yes, finally, she would be able to rejoice with Lily, and her future to plan. There would be her new freedom to enjoy. How many women had the freedom she now had? I am sorry, Lord Ranulph said softly, and for the first time it seemed to Lauren he spoke with sincerity. I am truly sorry, Miss Edgeworth. You have not deserved this. Deserved what, Lord Ranulph? She asked him. Trickery? But life is full of tricks and lies and masks. One would be foolish not to be armed against them. Especially when she herself was the biggest perpetrator of deception. He took her to where Aunt Clara was talking with the Countess of Redfield in the ballroom, bowed over her hand before raising it to his lips, and walked away without speaking another word to her. Lady Freya was back in the rose arbor when Lord Ranulph found her. She was sitting on the same seat she had occupied a few minutes before. Go away, she said ungraciously when she saw him coming. The Bedwyns rarely did as they were bidden. He moved closer and sat beside her. Well, he asked. Bloody hell and 1,000 damnations, she said, quiet venom in her voice. No, make it 1,000,000. He cocked his tongue but attempted no other admonition. Years ago, none of a long string of governesses had ever been able to impress upon their headstrong pupil the reality of the fact that she was a lady, and must learn to conduct herself accordingly. Her brothers had never made much effort to reinforce what the governesses had tried to teach. I want to go home, she said. I want to raid Wolf's wine cellar. I want to get foxed, blind drunk, with you. You can drink with me. That is very generous of you, Free, he said. It is very tempting, too, after what you have just put me through. I like the woman, damn it. But Wolf and Elaine would not appreciate being stranded here without the carriage, and it would offend my sensibilities to hole up the best liquor, with the sole purpose of drinking ourselves 3 sheets to the wind with it. Inferior liquor would serve the same purpose, but Wolf does not keep any. Wolf be damned, she said. Her brother raised his eyebrows. Drinking like a fish is no cure for what ails you, you know, he said. All you will get out of it is a crashing headache and a fervent wish that you were dead. When I need your advice, she said with woeful lack of originality, I will ask for it. Quite so, he shrugged. It was foolish to fall in love 3 years ago, and never fall out again, you know. He saw it coming, despite the darkness, but he thought it might do her more good than drinking herself under the nearest table. She clenched her right hand into a tight fist, drew back her arm and punched him hard on the chin. His head snapped back, but he was not swayed from his comfortable posture on the seat. Ouch, he said quietly after a few moments. If you really insist upon getting foxed free, we will steal 2 horses from the stables here and be on our way. Or we could go back inside and dance. You could show everyone what you are made of. show that you don't care a fig for Kit or any other mortal so far beneath the notice of Lady Freya Bedwyn. I don't care for him, she said, getting to her feet. I hate him, if you want to know the truth, Ralph. And as for that mealy-mouthed lady he has brought home with him, well, I would have to say he richly deserves her. And that is all I have to say. Are you coming or are you not? I'm coming. He got to his feet and grinned down at her. That's the girl free, up with the chin. The Bedwyn nose can be a priceless asset on occasions like this, can it not? Freya looked at him along the length of hers, as if he were a worm beneath her dancing slipper. Country balls, even when they were of the elaborate nature of the one as Alvesley, did not continue until dawn, as the most memorable of London balls did. Supper was served at 11, and was followed by the first and only waltz of the evening, for the relatively few couples bold and skilled enough to dance it. After that, the dancing continued, but the guests began gradually to drift away, and the Dowager Countess of Redfield retired to bed. Kit and Lauren took her up to her room. They had just waltzed together, and Kit had been powerfully reminded of their first waltz, when he had been struck by her beauty, daunted by her apparently cold dignity, and challenged to try to shock her out of her complacency. His grandmother was tired. There was none of her fierce independence tonight. Instead of clutching her cane with her good hand, she had one arm linked through Lauren's and the other through his, and she was leaning heavily. But Kit knew it had been an extraordinarily happy day for her. Good night. She relinquished Lauren's arm when Kit had opened her dressing-room door, and her dresser had come hurrying to assist her. Precious boy. Good night, Grandmamma. He helped her gently as she kissed his cheek. Good night. She turned to kiss Lauren, who leaned down to hug her too. Sweet child. Good night, Mom. Happy birthday. There were tears in Lauren's eyes when she took Kit's arm again. We have just danced together, he said, as they made their way back downstairs. If we return to the ballroom, we will have to take other partners. So we will, she said. It is the polite thing to do. Would it be impolite to walk outside together? He asked her. She shook her head. Everyone has a partner for this set anyway. There were still a few other people outside, mostly the young cousins, who were chattering and laughing together in a group. Kit led Lauren past them, exchanging cheerful greetings as they went. They strolled without talking through the parterres and across the lawn below, until they came to the little wooden bridge across the stream. They stopped there by unspoken assent and rested their arms along the wooden rail. There was the sound of water bubbling below, though it was invisible in the darkness cast by the trees, in contrast to Precious boy. Good night, Grandmamma. He helped her gently as she kissed his cheek. Good night. She turned to kiss Lauren, who leaned down to hug her too. Sweet child. Good night, Mom. Happy birthday. There were tears in Lauren's eyes when she took Kit's arm again. We have just danced together, he said, as they made their way back downstairs. If we return to the ballroom, we will have to take other partners. So we will, she said. It is the polite thing to do. Would it be impolite to walk outside together? He asked her. She shook her head. Everyone has a partner for this set anyway. There were still a few other people outside, mostly the young cousins, who were chattering and laughing together in a group. Kit led Lauren past them, exchanging cheerful greetings as they went. They strolled without talking through the parterres and across the lawn below, until they came to the little wooden bridge across the stream. They stopped there by unspoken assent and rested their arms along the wooden rail. There was the sound of water bubbling below, though it was invisible in the darkness cast by the trees, in contrast to Precious boy. Good night, Grandmamma. He helped her gently as she kissed his cheek. Good night. She turned to kiss Lauren, who leaned down to hug her too. Sweet child. Good night, Mom. Happy birthday. There were tears in Lauren's eyes when she took Kit's arm again. We have just danced together, he said as they made their way back downstairs. If we return to the ballroom, we will have to take other partners. So we will, she said. It is the polite thing to do. Would it be impolite to walk outside together? He asked her. She shook her head. Everyone has a partner for this set anyway. There were still a few other people outside, mostly the young cousins who were chattering and laughing together in a group. Kit led Lauren past them, exchanging cheerful greetings as they went. They strolled without talking through the parterres and across the lawn below, until they came to the little wooden bridge across the stream. They stopped there by unspoken assent and rested their arms along the wooden rail. There was the sound of water bubbling below, though it was invisible in the darkness cast by the trees, in contrast to precious boy. Good night, Grandmama. He hugged her gently as she kissed his cheek. Good night. She turned to kiss Lauren, who leaned down to hug her too. Sweet child. Good night, Mom. Happy birthday. There were tears in Lauren's eyes when she took Kit's arm again. We have just danced together, he said as they made their way back downstairs. If we return to the ballroom, we will have to take other partners. So we will, she said. It is the polite thing to do. Would it be impolite to walk outside together? He asked her. She shook her head. Everyone has a partner for this set anyway. There were still a few other people outside, mostly the young cousins who were chattering and laughing together in a group. Kit led Lauren past them, exchanging cheerful greetings as they went. They strolled without talking through the parterres and across the lawn below, until they came to the little wooden bridge across the stream. They stopped there by unspoken assent and rested their arms along the wooden rail. There was the sound of water bubbling below, though it was invisible in the darkness cast by the trees, in contrast to precious boy. Good night, Grandmama. He hugged her gently as she kissed his cheek. Good night. She turned to kiss Lauren, who leaned down to hug her too. Sweet child. Good night, Mom. Happy birthday. There were tears in Lauren's eyes when she took Kit's arm again. We have just danced together, he said as they made their way back downstairs. If we return to the ballroom, we will have to take other partners. So we will, she said. It is the polite thing to do.